Welcome back to MMA Al Dente. I am the guy who picked Eric Wisely to defeat Charles Oliveira. He's going to take away all that flashy grappling and he's going to dominate this fight. All right, I'm here to break down UFC Fight Night 240 fuck Moicano versus Denis. Let's just call it UFC Paris 3 or something. Okay, opening up the fight night event for UFC Paris is probably another fight, to be honest. But the first fight that I'm covering on MMA Al Dente is Balaji Oki taking on Chris Duncan. My prediction for this fight, and I've gone back and forth on this all week, but I'm going with Chris Duncan winning by decision. I don't have a lot of faith in that pick, obviously. I do think if you won a decision, it would be a really tight decision and a good grind. But I'm picking him to win because I do consider him to be better than anybody Balaji has beaten. And I also think, despite Balaji having not shown any bad traits at all as a fighter, cardio included, I still think Chris Duncan is the more viable grinder down the stretch in this matchup. Of course, there's doubt creeping in. I do think Balaji is more dangerous to begin with, on top of Chris Duncan being more vulnerable. I have to mention, of course, he's fought much better opposition, Chris Duncan, and that's where he's shown these vulnerabilities. But still, he's the guy who's been knocked out, submitted, and badly hurt. So I've got to say, yeah, he's the easier guy to hurt on paper than Balaji. And also, as far as the decision goes, I say I envision Duncan winning a tight decision, and I do think he would outlast Balaji and outpoint him in rounds 2 and 3. But I still don't know how the fucking world works, to be honest. Balaji is from Belgium. This fight night's in Paris. Does that mean anything? Does that give him an advantage? I seriously have no idea. I only know Long Island and the green shit. Which, by the way, thanks for checking in, guys. I've been stuck here in the green shit for like a month and a half. Nobody gives a good goddamn fuck. Has even one of you called the police? Let alone the FBI? Can somebody help me out? All right. I do consider Chris Duncan to be the more viable grinder in this matchup. It's not a lock by any means. Each man has won 3 decisions, but the 3 decision victories for Chris Duncan come in his last 4 victories, at or near the UFC level. Of course, he's got 2 decision wins in the UFC. And he showed he can be that grinder on the feet against Yanal Ashmouz or on the ground against Omar Morales. Which, despite the way that fight looked, that was in a lot of ways a more impressive performance. That's the one I look to here in this matchup. I'm thinking that's plan A for Chris Duncan, but Balaji could be a tough guy to wrangle, and if Duncan's not able to get him to the ground or corner him in the first place, I think he's got to get in his face and just be the guy with the better work rate down the stretch. It's all easier said than done. Balaji only lost once. It was by decision in his debut as a pro. And he was taken down. That was the story of the loss. And he was grounded and even put in the crucifix in the end and the rest of it. It wasn't a great look for him, but he still showed a lot of good traits. He didn't wilt. And even when he was most tired and his opponent was in the crucifix or headed that way, he kept fighting and didn't look for a way out, even in a fight that he knew he had no shot at winning. So, not a bad look for him, but still, that fight, despite being 9 fights ago or whatever, despite being in his debut, I should say, it's only 9 fights ago. It's not like it's that long ago. I mean, it is 6 years ago, but you know what I mean. Not too many fights in between. Speaking of which, I may as well mention the one draw you might see on his record. I was able to see that fight. It's an amateur fight, so it's a 9-minute fight, ostensibly meaningless. But again, this guy's only got 10 fights as a pro, so I may as well mention it. That was one where he was outstruck generally, and the guy, I think, also had more to offer on the ground, lacing up legs and whatever, and not letting Oki settle into top position. But Oki still did settle enough into top position, and that was only a draw because he was the better physical force in that matchup. But I think he was technically behind. So yeah, just know I saw that. But anyway, the 9 fights since that one loss to Sebastian DeFranco, he's looked very solid, and he's had to dig deep, uh, not too deep, because again, these decision victories he was in control early, playing the Matador and the cleaner outside striker against Nair Malikian, this Armenian dude he beat, and against Timothy Kawamba, we saw that fight in the UFC. It's a split decision, but whatever. He definitely won that fight. Although I'll say the success Timothy Kawamba had is the success I think Chris Duncan could have. That's the success I envision him duplicating. Only where Timothy Kawamba wasn't able to bring that pressure in round 3, I think Chris Duncan will. He won't let his foot off the gas. And to be fair to Kawamba, I think he took this fight on short notice against Oki. But whatever. So yeah, I think this will be a close fight. I favor Oki to get the knockout early if somebody was to get the finish early. But if not, if this fight's to go past round 2, which I think it will, I favor Chris Duncan, and not by the biggest margin. Because again, I don't know how the world works and what Belgium means to Paris. But I'm going with a tight decision victory for Chris Duncan, one where Balachioki slows down a little and Chris Duncan is able to rough him up. If not take him down and crowd him, then pressure him on the feet and get the better of him. Like that guy, the Armenian dude I mentioned, was starting to do that. He was getting chewed up early, but he was just too physically behind Balagioki. I think the guy's like 5'6" and whatever, and he wasn't a physical match for Oki in the way Chris Duncan will be. So I think if Chris Duncan's firing on all cylinders, rounds 2 and 3 should be his. I have bet on Chris Duncan, like I said, a very small bet, but I'm going to look for the props. Him winning by decision or him winning over 1.5, 2.5 rounds, whatever makes the most sense. And for Balagioki, maybe I'll waste something on him winning by stoppage early. Because I think when he's firing on all cylinders, he's more dangerous. And all the vulnerabilities that Chris Duncan has shown lead me to think, yeah, it could be worth a stab on Oki via knockout. But the pick, again, is Chris Duncan out hustling Balagioki and winning a tight decision despite what might be a crowd advantage for the guy from Belgium. It's all the same when you're living in the green shit. Okay, next up we have Nora Cornolle taking on Jacqueline Cavalcanti. My prediction for this fight is Cavalcanti wins by decision. These girls have fought before. It was the first fight of Nora's career as a pro and the second fight of Jacqueline's. So I'm usually very quick to dismiss those early fights, especially a debut loss. But here in this case, despite each of them having a lot of success since then and both girls making it to the UFC, the fight itself was still only 3 years ago. So it's very relevant in this matchup. Cavalcanti won that fight. I think she was the cleaner striker overall. And she actually won the big moments as well. Each girl had big moments, but Cavalcanti hurt her more. And I also think, even though each girl was taken to the ground, I think Cavalcanti would be more likely to exploit Nora Cornolle's wrestling defense, or lack thereof. Cavalcanti, she doesn't have a submission victory. She's got 3 wins via TKO, 4 wins via decision. Nora is the girl with the submission. And I actually don't know either girl's belt rank or whatever. But I don't think either girl has the jiu-jitsu to smoke the other one. But I do think Jacqueline Cavalcanti has a size, physicality, and wrestling advantage to exploit Nora Cornolle and, get some points anyway. Their first fight was a close enough fight. Each girl was taken down. Each girl was hurt. But Cavalcanti definitely won the fight. I thought she won the small moments. She was the cleaner, more mobile striker. And Nora Cornolle is much more dangerous and power-based and stalking. But also Cavalcanti hurt her a few times. Hurt her 20 seconds into the fight, a minute into the fight or whatever, stunned her. And then despite getting stunned with a spinning back fist sometime thereafter, she stunned her again. And I thought she was in general getting the best of the big moments in that fight. And also the takedown game was won by Jacqueline Cavalcanti. Nora hit the best takedown in round one. Again, after she was hurt in the first minute or so. And she hit a beautiful double leg in the center of the octagon. It's the best takedown I've ever seen from Nora Cornolle. But she still got taken down more often by Jacqueline, and she definitely lost that battle. So between that fight, and really only with that fight, but also with Nora Cornolle having that fight with Jocelyn Edwards in her UFC debut, which I thought she should have lost, and primarily due to the grappling, I'd have to say grappling's a weakness of Nora's, and I expect Jacqueline Cavalcanti to score points in one way or another with some takedowns. And I say that being fully aware that she is a striker. Both girls are strikers, really, but, it's MMA. Jacqueline Cavalcanti, she's only got one loss. It's the Martina Jindrova. Solid, above par PFL fighter. And Martina had her badly hurt in round 2 in their fight. And that was in the PFL. And Jacqueline, it wasn't like the spinning back fist against Nora Cornolle where she was stunned. She was hurt. And she survived. Martina was teeing off on her. But Jacqueline fought her way out and slowed the fight down. And ended up scratching and clawing, losing a split decision. But it was a really, really close fight. And that's not a bad loss, especially the way she lost it. And since then, she's on a 5-fight winning streak. Now has 2 wins in the UFC. And of course, the fight before that was a 5-round decision in the LFA for the championship. I think Jacqueline Cavalcanti is already an above-average UFC fighter. I think she's got a really high ceiling. And I think she should win this fight against Nora Cornolle. But Nora is going to be stalking her. Nora is more dangerous than her. And Nora, she has never been finished. She's been hurt and whatever I just said. Jacqueline hurt her a few times and she was out grappled by Edwards. But she hasn't wilted at all. She hasn't looked for a way out. And as she showed in her last fight against Melissa Dixon or Melissa Mullins or Melissa whatever, she just needs that one moment, land that big shot, and she'll take you out. And she's got killer body shots, already got multiple finishes. She, again, stunned Cavalcanti already. She's showing she's got the power. She's dangerous in this matchup. But I'm picking Jacqueline Cavalcanti. I like the way she's handled herself. I think she's got wrestling if she needs to. Not that she's a wrestler, but in this matchup, should be there for her. And I think she's also got mobility on her side, where she can play the matador and get the better of Nora on the outside. So I'm picking Jacqueline Cavalcanti to win a decision. I have bet on her, and I'll wait for the props to drop to see if I'm going to bet anymore. Next up, we have Daniel Barez versus Victor Altamirano. My prediction for this fight is Altamirano wins, and I've got him winning by decision. I do think it's going to be one of those razor-tight fights. And in the event of a really close fight, I side with the guy that is in his athletic prime. And that's Victor Altamirano. He's only 2 years younger than Daniel Barez, but it's a crucial 2 years. He's 33 going on 34, as opposed to 35 going on 36 with a 1-year layoff. So yeah, I trust Victor Altamirano's health a little more. And I also think he's been fighting steadily at the UFC level, or close enough, for almost 5 years or so. And I think I just estimate him a little higher than I do Daniel Barez, and I think he's going to win. Victor Altamirano, I may as well talk about his losses here. First of all, he did have 2 losses as an amateur that were by rear naked choke. And then he had 1 professional loss that was by a rear naked choke in his first loss. So it looked like that would be a thing for him. But I have to say that first professional loss was to Jared Brooks, who's an incredible fighter, world class, and could easily still be in the UFC and probably should be. But that's it. Since then, he's lost 3 other times, all in the octagon, and they were all by decision. So I can't say he's totally patched up his submission defense, but I think it's a good look that to beat him, you have to grind for 15 minutes these days, and as opposed to the first few losses of his in which he was strangled. Daniel Barez, he was submitted recently. It still might be a thing with him. Jafel Filho got him out of there with an arm triangle choke in round 1 after Barez almost had him out of there with some body shots. It was a complete turnaround and a real collapse. Really sucked for Barez. But Jafel Filho is an excellent submission artist. I think he's a much bigger threat than Victor Altamirano or any of these guys that I mentioned. And I think there's no shame in getting submitted by him. And also, that's the one guy to submit him in the last 10 years or so. He was submitted 10 years ago by this guy, Chris Mia, who just rear naked choked him in round 2 after controlling him early. And Manel Kopp, who got him out of there with an arm bar from the guard, actually. So, there's that. And you know what? Victor Altamirano, I've seen him hit multiple subs from the guard, triangles and arm bars. I don't know how many, but a few. But still, Daniel Barez, yeah, he's submittable on paper with 3 submission losses. And we got a reminder of that with Jafel Filho. But I still don't think he should get submitted against Victor here in this fight. Doesn't mean I'm not going to bet on it. You know me, I'm a junkie. But I think this will go down to the wire. You put a gun to my head, I'd say, yeah, this is going to be a tight decision. And I think I'd give Victor Altamirano the edge by just being the healthier fighter, the younger fighter, who I expect to be giving more in round 3. So that's really the basis for the pick. Barez, he has lost 3 times by decision as well. The last of which was to Carlos Hernandez on the Contender Series. Razor thin fight, really could have gone either way. Before that was to this guy David Zawicka. That was wrestling mainly. I believe that was the story of that loss. And then the other one was to this decent guy in his second fight. So, whatever. It is what it is. So, Barez, I think it's good that he's battled his way back to the UFC. And I think he had a really tough loss against Jafel Filho in his debut. And I don't think Altamirano can duplicate that loss. But I still don't think Barez is going to be going through him with this danger. I think Altamirano is tough enough, and his body's tough enough to stand up to the power of Barez. And I think Altamirano will outpoint him, whether that's with his hands down the stretch or even by turning the tables and taking Barez down in the second half of this fight. I just expect the hustle to be the difference. So I'm going with Victor Altamirano. I have bet on Victor Altamirano, and I will lose money on Victor Altamirano. Next up, we have Eileen Perez taking on Daria Zheleznyakova. My prediction for this fight is Eileen Perez wins. And I guess if you put a gun to my head, I'd go with her winning by decision. But if you put props in front of me, I don't know which way I'd go. Because look, decision seems like the obvious choice, and that's how Perez won her 3 UFC fights. So it seems most reasonable. But Daria Zheleznyakova only has 1 loss, and it's by a TKO. She was mounted by Melissa Dixon, now Melissa Mullins or whatever. And that was after she teed off on Melissa in the first portion of that fight. But then she was taken down, threw up an arm bar, got it shucked to the side, and then was mounted and pounded out. She also had another fight against this judoka, this Olympian judoka, I believe, who was quite old for an MMA fighter, like close to 40 when she fought Daria. And she was able to take Daria down. And for a moment, it looked like she could force a stoppage on top as well. Very similar position. Daria was able to survive, even though it came really close. And then she found her way on top, gassed out the judoka a little bit. And once she got on top, she overwhelmed her and got a TKO. Still, it showed another, vulnerability there. She's definitely weak on the ground, Daria. And I think Eileen Perez is a bad matchup and that she's on a mission to take the fight to the ground. There's going to be no, you know, fucking around here with Eileen Perez. I mean, she can strike and she will strike, but she's going to be striking her way into takedowns. I'm sure, especially her coaches have seen the footage on Daria, and they're looking for Eileen to take her down and advance on her. Eileen Perez has a record of 10-2. She's got 5 decision victories, and all 3 of her UFC victories are by decision. So, yeah, things are trending that way at the UFC level. But I think the dominance on the ground could open up opportunities here for Eileen Perez. Eileen, she's got 2 losses, only one of which is legitimate, and that was in her UFC debut to Stephanie Egger. Stephanie Egger, who was able to out grapple, out judoka her, and rear naked choke her down the stretch in round 2 when she got a little tired. That was a tough debut. I forget the circumstances that she took that fight under, but either way, tough debut, and that's her one legit loss. Her other loss is the Tamiris Vidal, current UFC fighter, and it's a disqualification. She got a little sloppy and hit her with some illegal knees, but she was being the bully in that fight, and she was dominating. I'd say she was definitely going to win. So, yeah, I mean, I think Eileen Perez should definitely win this fight. I think if she's not able to take this fight to the ground, she's in trouble. But I think her takedown prowess is above average for UFC fighters. And I think she's going to have an easy time ragdolling Daria Zheleznyakova. Daria did get taken down by Montserrat Rendon in her last fight. I thought it was a good win for Daria. Maybe not the best overall fight, but whatever. Good win, but this is a different fighter in Eileen Perez. She's not exactly the slowest neutralizing fighter like Montserrat Rendon is. Eileen Perez, I think she might take her down and speed things up even. So I've got Eileen Perez winning. I'll go with the decision if you put a gun to my head, but I doubt I'd even bet on that, especially because the juicier shit's going to be by finish. But the money line covers everything, and I played the money line. Eileen Perez is the pick. Next up, we have Taylor Lapilus taking on Vince Morales, who is taking this fight on short notice and making his return to the UFC. My prediction for this fight is Taylor wins by decision. I just think it seems like the most likely path to victory. In order to defeat Taylor, historically, you have to take him to the ground. And I do think Vince can do that, but I don't think he can do that like Farid Basharat did and make a whole game plan of it. And I think on the feet, while Vince is more dangerous, perhaps, and more aggressive, I think Taylor is the overall better striker. I think he's going to outpoint Vince Morales going backwards or going forwards. I think he can handle the pressure from Vince if Vince is pressuring him. And Taylor on the outside, he's got the sharper strikes, the better kicks, which have given Morales trouble in the past, a lot of low kick trouble and a lot of his losses in the UFC. And I think Taylor will just be the cleaner striker. I also think should they get in tight and it becomes more grappling heavy, Taylor is physically stronger, I think, than Vince Morales. That physicality advantage could help him, whether it's, you know, bullying and winning the position, getting on top, getting the position you want, or just keeping Vince Morales off his hips in the first place. So Taylor is the pick. I've got him winning by decision. This would have been the pick if Morales was on a full camp, but especially on a short notice fight here, with a short notice fight, a week and a half notice or whatever, I expect Taylor Lapilus to win. However, Vince Morales has looked really good as of late. He left the UFC 2 years ago, and he's been on a 5-fight winning streak. And he beat 5 solid fighters as well. A few of them UFC fighters. Hunter Azure, that was his last win a month ago, and he got him out of there with a Peruvian necktie in round 3. How fucking awesome is that? But he also got Teruto Ishihara out of there with an anaconda. Teruto kind of fizzled out of the UFC pretty quickly, but he made it. And he also got a Darce choke over this guy, Luis Guerrero. A Darce, a Peruvian necktie, and an anaconda. For a guy that only had 2 submission victories before that, that's a pretty good look for Vince Morales. And getting none of them in round 1. He also got a TKO that was in round 2 as well. But 4 finishes down the stretch in his 5 victories, and the other of which was over this guy, Yuki Matoya, who's a very good fighter, and he shut him down in Ryzen. But Vince, he's got a lot of momentum. And I'll tell you, that last loss in the UFC to Miles Johns, I thought Miles won, but it wasn't a complete shutout. And I do think Vince showed toughness, if nothing else, against Jonathan Martinez and Miles Johns in those last two losses of his. Especially because the loss before that was him getting finished by strikes for the only time and the first time against Chris Gutierrez. Chris, who's Mr. Leg Kick, chopped him down with leg kicks in round 2. But before that, he stood tall against Song Yadong and Benito Lopez in the UFC. And then before that, he was submitted twice before getting to the UFC. This guy, Josh Wick, got him with an armbar from the guard, where Vince got a little too comfortable. And Domingo Pilarte choked him out with a rear naked choke on the Contender Series. Again, he choked him out. Vince Morales did not tap. It's a technical rear naked choke, which, again, if nothing else, shows toughness. But yeah, Vince Morales, he's already beaten enough good fighters where it wouldn't surprise me if he was to beat Taylor. He's beaten Eamon Zahabi, Draco Rodriguez, Louis Smolka, and then these 5 guys I mentioned after leaving the UFC. He's definitely a talent, Vince Morales, and he's in his athletic prime. But I think athletically and physically, he's at a disadvantage against Taylor Lapilus. And I think that power and aggression might work against somebody he can bully physically, but I don't think he's going to be able to barge his way into dominant position over Taylor Lapilus. He's just too calm, too seasoned of a striker, and I think too seasoned of a fighter altogether, Taylor. And it's not like he isn't used to fighting long either. The guy's a competent point fighter. Again, if you can take him down, you could take him out of his element completely. But otherwise, he's the guy that's usually dictating the fight. And I think here he might have a tough first round with Vince Morales. But once he figures out how to take away that aggression, I think he's going to be taking over this fight and winning a decision. Taylor Lapilus by decision is the pick, and I'll wait to see if it's the bet, but he's a pretty big favorite, so it might not be, and I might just have to bet on Vince Morales. Like a jerk off. Next up, we have Ludovic Klein versus Roosevelt Roberts. My prediction for the fight is Klein wins by knockout. I think that's the most likely outcome here. But he's an 8-1 favorite. So even when the props drop, I doubt I'll be betting on that. I doubt it'll be worth it. Although I have to see. I also have to see what his submission line is like, to be honest. Because Roberts has shown to be more vulnerable in that regard, even though Klein hasn't won by submission in 7 years. I just know he's better than he's shown in the UFC. But yeah, the pick is Klein, no doubt. I think Klein is a force. He's made a great lightweight force since moving up, and he's looked phenomenal, especially in that Thiago Moises fight. That was just an ass kicking and a shutout. He looked really, really good there. And Roosevelt Roberts, he's looked vulnerable, since he got into the UFC many years ago. And of course, he was cut, but then he made his way back through the Ultimate Fighter show. He's got a record of 12-4. As opposed to the 22-4 record for Klein. And Roberts has been knocked out by a spinning wheel kick, which I should mention, Klein's been knocked out as well. But let me just get to this first because I think it's more relevant. Bahamondes was knocked out by, Ignacio Bahamondes knocked out Roberts with a spinning wheel kick in round 3 in the final seconds. No shame in getting knocked out by that. But the brutality of the knockout might have done a little extra to his chin and his overall health. It was brutal. Before that, he was knocked halfway out, knocked down by Kevin Kroom and then guillotined. That was overturned because Kevin Kroom, I don't know, was a scumbag or something. But either way, Kevin Kroom did get him out of there with a guillotine choke. And he hurt him. And before that, he was armbarred by Jim Miller. That was his first loss in which he was finished. Jim Miller was a little too much for him on the ground, got on top of him, Roosevelt turned into him, and then got armbarred. Same exact thing happened against Mateusz Rombeski. The fight was a little different, but it's pretty much the same fight. And of course, he lost his first fight by decision to Vince from Hell Pichel. Vince, who outlasted him in the UFC and outpointed him down the stretch. But yeah, I've got to go with. And oh yeah, he lost on the Ultimate Fighter by boring decision to Austin Hubbard. One of the shittiest sparring matches that really could have gone either way, but it went to Austin Hubbard because he's the master of the fucking sparring match. I like Austin. But Klein is my pick here because of all that vulnerability from Roosevelt Roberts. I can talk about how Klein was submitted by Nate Landwehr and Klein was knocked out by this guy, Ivan, whatever, years ago. But Roberts has shown to be more vulnerable recently, and Klein is much more dangerous in the first place, even though he's the guy who has somewhat recently come up in weight. He's the sharper striker, I think the more powerful striker, and I think he's also more powerful and strong on the in tight with his grappling, and he's got physicality on his side. I'm done doubting Ludovic Klein at lightweight, and I've got him winning this fight. I think he's going to probably steamroll Roberts, but can't say for sure. So yeah, I've got Klein winning. I'll wait to see if any props jump out at me. Maybe I'll play Roberts. Maybe I'll play Klein via submission. But in general, I'm staying away from this one. Not planning on betting more than $4. And I'm going to sit back and hope for some violence. Klein by knockout is the pick. Next up, we have Umar Sy versus Da Woon Jung. My prediction for this fight is Umar Sy wins, and I've got him winning by a stoppage. I think it's more likely than a decision. I think Umar's a very good prospect. Got a high ceiling, a well-rounded skill set. He's got 4 TKOs and 4 submissions in his 10 wins. And I guess most impressively, he's got 2 decision victories. Shows, even if he can't get you away, get you out of there, and he's dominating you on the ground, he can still slow things down and fight the full 15 minutes. And I think he's just got a lot going on where I trust him to get by Da Woon Jung, even though Da's got better experience and he's been around the UFC for some time now. And that's also where he suffered the majority of his losses. Speaking of which, he does have 5 losses, Da Woon Jung. He was knocked out once, somewhat recently, against Dustin Jacoby. Dustin Jacoby's an excellent striker. May not be Mr. Knockout artist, but he's a big 6'4" K1 striker. So there's no shame in getting knocked out by him. And he was submitted twice. In his last fight a year ago, he was submitted by Carlos Olberg. Got him out of there with a rear naked choke in round 3. And he was submitted way back when by Rotund Roque Martinez 10 years ago, who got him out of there with a Kimura. And I miss that guy. But yeah, he's definitely shown more vulnerabilities because he's been in there with good fighters as opposed to Umar Sy. But I still think Umar Sy has that athleticism and physicality that matches, if not exceeds, Da Woon Jung. And he does have 5 inches of reach over Da Woon Jung as well, which is good because Da Woon Jung is primarily a threat on the feet. He's got 15 wins, 11 of them are via knockout. That's his thing. But Umar Sy has not shown any weaknesses whatsoever. He's looked damn near perfect as a fighter. If there was this fight where he was knocked half out and this fight where he gave up his back, I'd be able to look for openings here to bet on Da Woon Jung. But instead, I just have to say, looking at their records, if there's any value on Da Woon Jung, it's probably him winning by knockout. That's probably his primary path to victory. And that might be the only thing worth betting on. But I have not bet on it. Right now, it's just the money line staring at me, and I don't find the Umar Sy money line enticing at all. So I'll wait for the prop, see if anything opens up, even the over-under, because I do think there'd be a finish in this fight. But again, as of now, no bets, and I'm going with Umar Sy. And I think he would bully Da on the ground, and on the feet, if he's not bullying him, at the very least, he's got the physical tools to stop Da Woon Jung from bullying him and knocking him out. So I'm going to go with Umar Sy. I think he gets it done via round 2 stoppage. And I do mean TKO, I guess. but a rear naked choke certainly wouldn't surprise me. And we'll see what happens. Next up, we have Ivan Urslan taking on Iwan Kutalaba. My prediction for this fight is Iwan Kutalaba wins, and I've got him winning by knockout or TKO. I do think, regardless of who wins, we should expect a finish. This guy, Ivan Urslan's a pretty potent finisher, very dangerous guy. And, of course, both guys have been finished as well in their losses. Iwan's got a lot more losses to speak of. He's got 10 losses, and he was finished in 7 of them. 3 by knockout, 4 by submission. And the knockouts, really, one of them was half a stoppage when Ankalaev head kicked him, and I think he was playing possum. But Ankalaev made that right in the next fight and got a clean knockout victory. Iwan, though, despite the knockouts, he is still 30 years old, smack dab in the middle of his prime, and he did show as recently as last year that his danger could still be a factor, and the story of the fight, as he knocked out Tanner Boser. And I think really here the basis for the prediction is that Iwan is still healthy, dangerous, and I think a lot of his losses are just explainable. You know, you could dismiss them because they're against such good fighters at the UFC level. Ivan Urslan has not proven himself like those guys, and Ivan, despite having all this pretty offense, you know, with the majority of his wins coming via TKO, he's still got 3 losses, one of which is a knockout, and it was less than a year ago. He was knocked out less than a year ago. He only won 1 fight since. I don't exactly understand how he got the UFC contract here off of his recent fights, because he also lost another fight by decision in his last 4 fights. But he is still a very dangerous guy, and this is a very, very attractive matchup, enticing matchup. So you could make this the fucking main event of a pay-per-view, and I'd be fine with it, because I know someone's going to die. But Ivan, let's talk about it. He's got a record of 14-3. The one loss via knockout was a year ago, and it was a knockout. This guy Igor Heredik or whatever, knocked him unconscious. And then he was submitted to Thomas Narkun, a really good Polish fighter. That was like 4 years ago. And it wasn't Igor, it was Rafal Heredik knocked him out. And then his one decision loss is to another good fighter who beat him by 5-round decision. This guy Ibrahim Chuzugayev was just outstriking him cleanly for 5 rounds. And that was a good look, him getting his ass kicked there and not going anywhere. But still, I have to trust that he's vulnerable. He's in the middle of his prime as well. He's 32 years old, but he's still a guy who was knocked out within the last year. And he's fighting a fucking savage in Kutalaba. Also on the ground, I'd expect more from Kutalaba. This guy Ivan does have a submission victory. Got an arm triangle choke some years back. And Ivan Kutalaba, I keep trying to say Kutataladze, he's only got 2 submissions, so it's not like he's exactly Mr. Jiu-Jitsu or whatever. But we've seen him take fights to the ground and work over UFC fighters, one of which is fighting for a world championship in the very next event, as a matter of fact. So I just think Iwan's got more to offer on the ground. And with his aggression and danger, of course, you could expect a finish there as well. So I think, look, this one should end with a finish either way. This guy, Ivan Urslan, is a potent finisher, perhaps more dangerous than Iwan Kutalaba. But I'm still going with Iwan because I think he's got a little more trustworthy skills, and he's also the most intense dude in the world. He's right up there with anybody else as far as intensity and aggression, and I think he's going to bring a storm to Ivan Urslan and welcome him to the UFC with some real violence. So I'm going with Iwan Kutalaba, I should say. Of course, if I'm wrong, it's going to be Ivan who wins. But yeah, let's go with Iwan Kutalaba. I bet on him, and I'll wait for the over-under and the props because both could intrigue me there. Next up, we have Ziam versus Matt Frevola. My prediction for this fight is Frevola wins by decision. I don't have the most confidence in that pick, but it's what I'm going with. And I think relentless takedowns would be what he needs to win this fight. Ziam doesn't have the best wrestling defense to begin with, but I think Matt Frevola, his takedown prowess, and even just his relentless pace has kind of been forgotten because he's done nothing but have fights finish in round one, victories or defeats for the last 5 years or so. But I still think in this fight, he's going to be safe from the danger of Ziam, which I can't say for sure, but uh, I do have to go that way. I think Frevola's chin is the biggest liability in the matchup. But Ziam, the last time he got a knockout was in 2018. It was over a good fighter, a former Spanish UFC fighter. But still, it's been 6 years. He does have 5 knockouts. He also knocked out Taylor Lapilus's brother with a head kick. And he can get it done on the feet. But at the UFC level, he just has not proven to be that dangerous. And I think if Frevola's chin is taken off the table, I envision him slightly out hustling for Ziam, who's a tough guy to out hustle. But look, the Frevola that beat Jalen Turner and Luis Pena, two other taller guys, and doing so by being more active and having the better takedowns. I think that's the Frevola that wins this matchup. Again, it's been some time since we've seen him. He's gotten a lot of round one knockouts as of late, but he is coming off a round one knockout to Benoit Saint Denis some time ago. And hopefully for this fight, he's not trying to be the first guy to knock out for Ziam or even the fourth guy to submit for Ziam, but trying to be the second guy to out hustle and outwork for Ziam and win a decision. The last guy to do that was Don Madge in the UFC debut, I believe, for Ziam. But Ziam, he's healthy. His 3 losses in which he was finished, like I said, they're all submissions. They're actually all rear naked chokes. He was rear naked choked by 2 good fighters earlier in his career, 8 to 10 years ago. And then the only guy to submit him lately was Terrence McKinney 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago. And of course, if I'm going to mention McKinney, I may as well mention that he knocked out Frevola in 7 seconds. Don't think I didn't see that fight. But I do think this one has both of their weaknesses kind of taken off the table. Frevola, who I thought was more of a submission artist when he got into the UFC with that arm triangle choke, but he's not going to be the guy to go through Ziam with a rear naked. And I don't think Ziam is going to go through Matt Frevola's chin, although I'd say that's more likely. But barring that, I envision a close battle with Matt Frevola hitting the takedowns, being more active in general, and just winning with aggression and control. I don't think he'll control Ziam easily for large portions of the fight, but I think he'll do enough over the course of the fight to get the nod. So Matt Frevola via the hustle is the pick. I'll go with him winning by decision. I have bet on him, even though he was an underdog when I did bet on him, but this is still a toss-up. Same fucking thing. I'm going with Frevola and not with a lot of confidence. Up next, we have Morgan Charriere. Not Charriere, as I've been saying for a year, but Morgan Charriere taking on Gabriel Miranda. By the way, I'm totally going to slip and call him Charriere before the video's done here. But anyway, my prediction is Morgan wins, and I've got him winning by round 2 TKO. And I might look to bet on those props. Right now, he's too big of a favorite, but I am going to wait for the props and the over-under. I'll play Morgan by TKO, and I will also play a small little bet on Gabriel Miranda by round 1 submission. Because at least on paper, that's his only path to victory. Even though he's gotten a few submissions outside of round 2 and even 1 TKO. But he's got a record of 17-6. Of those 17 wins, all 17 are via finish, 16 are via submission, and maybe 14 of them are in round 1. So every now and then you just have to trust the record. And that's what I'm doing with Gabriel Miranda as far as his victory goes. But I'm picking Charriere to take away all that grappling and to take him out of the fight in one way or another, force him to stand up, and Morgan is really sharp, It's not like Gabriel is completely lost, and he's very tough and the rest of it, but he doesn't have enough to stand up to Morgan Charriere, and I think Morgan would put him away for sure. Morgan has been submitted once. It was a long time ago, probably 10 years ago or so, and it was a heel hook in 2 minutes. That's it, though. Every other loss is by decision, and most of them are to good fighters, including the last fight to Chepe Mariscal, which really could have gone either way, in my opinion. But Gabriel Miranda is uniquely dangerous, a unique threat, and he will put Morgan to the test. And I'd like to have that covered with a small bet. But after that, I've got Morgan taking over this fight and chewing him up. Really chewing him up. Gabriel does have 6 losses, 4 of which are by decision and 2 are by TKO. Wagner Rocha TKO'd him in 2016. And the other guy to get him out of there since then was Benoit Saint Denis a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And that was right away in round 2, even though we almost got it done at the end of round 1. But yeah, he's definitely easy to figure out as a victor. As a loser, though, it could look one of 2 ways. It could be Morgan shutting him down positionally and having Gabriel do the jiu-jitsu thing to survive, or it could be Gabriel just getting pieced up on the feet or overwhelmed on the ground even. And I think that's what Morgan Charriere will do. Fuck, I did it. Charriere. And get a TKO victory. And I will bet on that, and I'll wait to see what the over-under looks like, although I'm very sure it'll be set at 1.5 rounds, and it won't be worth touching. Up next, we have Kevin Jousett versus Bryan Battle. My prediction for the fight is Bryan Battle wins, and I'll go with him winning by decision. Bryan Battle's a pretty solid finisher. I mean, lately he's been getting knockouts in 20 seconds, so maybe that'll happen. But if not, he's a guy that typically gets his finishes in the second round. Wears you out a little bit, figures you out, and starts sucking the life out of you before he can put you away. And there's a chance that happens here, but Kevin Jousett has looked pretty damn tough when he's needed to look pretty damn tough. So I'm picking Battle to win a decision. I'm picking him to outpoint Jousett, with Jousett being a little too slow and plodding for Bryan Battle, and Battle able to work things from the outside, find kicking range, and get off on Jousett, and to keep moving and circling. But in tight, Jousett wants to get in tight and bully you with his physicality most of the time. You know, that's plan B at the very least for him. And I don't think he'd be able to do that easily to Bryan Battle. I know Battle was completely neutralized by Rinat Fakhretdinov, but he's still a guy who's historically been tough to bully like that. And I'll go back to the Andre Petroski fight, where he wore him down and got him out of there with a ninja choke on the Ultimate Fighter. But Bryan Battle, the one loss he has as a pro that's been recent is the Rinat. Before that, he lost in his second fight ever as a pro, and that was an armbar in 50 seconds to this guy, Nicholas Martino. It was a while ago, but it was only 5 years ago, like to the day. So it wasn't that long ago, but only his second fight. And I have to mention, I've seen him knocked unconscious as well. This was 7.5 years ago, and it was his amateur debut at heavyweight, where he got kicked in the head by this massive Brazilian heavyweight dude. So that happened. It's forgivable, but just know that I know it happened. Kevin Jousett, he's got the same record as Bryan Battle. Both guys have a 10-2 record, thanks to Angelosa. But his 2 losses come via TKO doctor stoppage to Jack Della Maddalena in only his 3rd fight. Jack was all over him, hurting him. Kevin was surviving. He was hurt badly and put on his back, but he survived. Didn't go anywhere, standing up to one of the most dangerous strikers today. And I think in retrospect, especially, that's a good look for him. So it wasn't a legit TKO, but it would have been a legit loss had they made it to the final bell or whatever. And then his other loss was this guy, Caleb Rideout, who beat him by split decision in 2022. That was a fight where it was like too little, too late for Jousett, and I do think he spent a lot of that time being exploited as more of a slow, plodding zombie, and the guy Rideout was just too fast. That's really the basis for the pick here. I think Brian Battle can duplicate a lot of success that the guy Caleb had, early on, especially. But those are his two losses. He's never been finished. No real, never legitimately finished. I've seen him hurt by Jack Della Maddalena, but that only makes me think more highly of his toughness. And yeah, he may not be the most well-rounded guy on paper, but he got Kiefer Crosby out of there with a submission in his first UFC fight. So not a bad look at all to get your first submission win in the UFC. But really, his best win definitely comes against. He's got some good ones, but his best win definitely comes against Kenan Song or Song Kenan, who he beat in December of last year. That was just a clean victory for Kevin Jousett. Really bullied him, got him tight and physically bullied him. And I think, yeah, he's here to stay in the UFC. But I don't think he's going to win this fight. I'm going with Brian Battle here because I think the biggest trait that could be exploited between either guy is the lack of speed and the slower, plodding, zombie-like style of Kevin Jousett. And I've got Brian Battle not going through him like he has some others recently, but going around him and outpointing him from the outside and probably, handling him well when they're in tight and not getting handled himself at the very least. So I got this one being a pretty close fight. I do think it could be one where each guy wins a round and it comes down to the end or whatever. But I've got Brian Battle winning. He's shown me a lot. I think he's looked excellent in the UFC, aside from that one loss. And I'm trusting him to get a victory here. Brian Battle is the pick, and I'll go with him winning by decision. And up next, we have Joanderson Brito versus William Gomis. My prediction for this fight is Joanderson Brito wins by submission, and I'll go with him winning at the end of round one. I am tempted to bet on William Gomis winning by decision, because I think that's his most likely path to victory, and of course he's got the crowd on his side. But that's just because the odds are pretty wide for Joanderson Brito. And you know what? It's going to be tough to trim his path to victory down to one thing or another once the props drop. Of course, round one is always possible because he's so dynamic. But William Gomis has only been finished once, and it was actually in round two, I believe. And it was to Morgan Charriere. Morgan Charriere, who's an excellent fighter and fighting on this card, got him out of there with a heel hook. And that was in his fourth fight back in 2016 or something. And his last loss, actually. And the only other loss before that is an even better loss, so to speak. A decision loss to Saladin Parnas in his MMA debut. So that's very forgivable. But I have to say, he has shown to be tough to submit since the Morgan Charriere fight. He got submitted by Charriere, which I've seen that. And then in his next two fights, he got a knockout in round two with some knees and then won a split decision. And he was able to fend off a lot of submissions there. He looked like he was having no part of it. Shucked off a lot of submissions. And of course, this carries him all the way to his second to last fight against Francis Marshall, where I have to say, I thought he was dead. I thought Francis Marshall had him dead to rights in round three with a rear naked choke, flattened out, nowhere to go, and nowhere to move, which I guess is the same thing as nowhere to go. And he fought his way out, found himself a little room to breathe, found himself a little room to move, and he fought out of it. And in the end, he had done enough to win a split decision in that fight. So his submission defense and all of his determination and the rest of it really came through for him in a big way there. But, of course, Joanderson Brito is much more dangerous than anybody. Typically, especially in round one, but Joanderson Brito's got a good amount of finishes later, a lot in round two. And most impressively, he got that ninja choke against Jonathan Pierce in round two with like a minute left. And that was a fight in which I thought Pierce just needed to get by round one and that he would accelerate. And it looked like that's what was going to be happening, but no, he denied him, Joanderson Brito, and got him out of there with a ninja choke. So that was really impressive. And of course, he didn't look bad at all against Jack Shore, but that wasn't a legit TKO victory in my book. Still a good look for him, though. It didn't look like his cardio was a problem at all. And I'm harping on the cardio because that's the most clear path to defeating Joanderson Brito is to tire him out like Bill Algeo did. Bill Algeo is the last guy to beat him and the only guy to beat him in the last 10 years or whatever. And he did so by outlasting, weighing on Joanderson Brito and outlasting him to win a tight decision. I have to mention Joe Anderson was finished twice in his first 4 fights or whatever. He lost in his debut by submission with a rear naked choke. It was pretty basic and conventional. Took him down, took his back, and choked him within 2 or 3 minutes. And he lost his 4th fight or whatever by TKO, and I think it was due to slams. I know he was slammed once on camera, and then the jerk off holding the camera kind of turned it away, and it's tough to tell what happened after that, but you just see like a body flipping. So I think he was slammed and TKO'd in a few minutes there in round 1. But again, don't hold me to that because not the best footage. Still though, he has been finished. It did happen, but typically the way to beat him today, I'd say, would be by outlasting him. And Gomis could do that. He's durable. He's never been knocked out and only submitted once 10 years ago or whatever to a good UFC level fighter today on the same fucking card, in fact. But I still think William Gomis is at a distinct physical disadvantage. And I think he himself has slowed down. He hasn't had the best round 3 in the UFC, despite the bullshit stoppage finish over Giannis Gamori. He still was going to win that fight, in my opinion, but I didn't think that was. I thought that was a nut shot. And then his other 2 fights in the UFC were a little lackluster in round 3 against Jarno Aarons and against Francis Marshall, again, where he was dominated. So I do think that advantage that he could potentially have over Joanderson Brito, it's not going to be as likely as it was for somebody like Bill Algeo, prime Bill Algeo, who beat Joanderson Brito. And Jonathan Pierce, I really think, shit the bed there because that guy's an excellent cardio fighter and he was on his way to a victory. But Joe Anderson shut that down again in the 10th minute, 9th minute of the fight with a ninja choke. So I'm trusting Joe Anderson to get the win. I'm going to go with him getting a submission, but I'm not betting on him. I mean, I might bet on submission or reach for some props or whatever. But yeah, it's just he's too big of a favorite for me to comfortably bet on him, especially considering the hometown crowd and the rest of it. So I'm going with Joe Anderson, round 2 submission or whatever I said, submission at the end of round 1. But I do think there's not a lot of value on him, and maybe I'll waste some money the other way. Next up, we have Nasruddin Imavov versus Brendan Allen in the co-main event. My prediction for this fight is Brendan Allen wins. And I've got him winning by round 3 submission. I was initially going to say decision because I think he's going to have a hard time getting Imavov to the ground, but he will get him to the ground. And then I thought, you know what, if Brendan Allen gets anybody to the ground in the second half of the fight, they're in trouble. So I'll go with a round 3 submission. But I do think Imavov could totally win this fight by taking away the grappling with the wrestling. If Nasruddin Imavov can keep this fight standing, I think he's got an advantage on the feet. I think that advantage is less distinct than Brendan Allen's advantage on the ground. Much less distinct. But I still think it's an advantage. I think Brendan Allen hits hard, much harder than he'll ever be given credit for, especially those thunderous body kicks. But I still think Imavov is faster and he's the overall more active striker. I have a hard time envisioning Brendan Allen outstriking or, putting together more volume anyway. Outstriking him is different. You land the right shot at the right time, even without rocking him, just the right body kicks or whatever I was just talking about. Allen is in the realm of winning the striking fight, especially in a 3-round fight. But I still think he's at a disadvantage against Nasruddin Imavov. And the fight I envision Allen winning, of course, even if it is a decision, it's with grappling. I don't think Imavov's going to be easy to take down, but I think Brendan Allen can really zero in on takedowns, especially because this is a 3-round fight, which I normally wouldn't have to go out of my way to bring up. But I feel like we all agree this should be a fight that's 5 rounds. Each guy has 3 of his last 4 fights being a 5-round headliner in the UFC. So this, I mean, it's still as important of a fight, a title eliminator or something close to that. But yeah, it's 3 rounds. And I think with 3 rounds, there's less cardio concerns altogether, even though Allen really made an awesome 25th minute effort to win his last fight against Chris Curtis. But I think Allen will be able to put his foot on the gas and really go for it grappling wise. I think he knows he needs to take down Nasruddin Imavov, and then he will do more with that takedown than anyone else could. Sean Strickland, Edmund Shabazian, fucking Jared Cannonier, or whatever. Brendan Allen is in another league on the ground. And I think that's the fight I envision him winning. I went with round 3 submission because I think he'll get that control somewhere earlier in the middle of the fight and slow Imavov down. And the next time he gets control, it'll be that much greater. But, of course, Imavov is a tough guy to take down. Imavov was submitted only once, and it was in his MMA debut. It was a guillotine choke. He looked like shit. He looked like he didn't know how to grapple. And it was just not a good performance, but it's totally forgivable because it's his first fight ever. But after that, he's looked very damn tough, and he's only lost a few other times. This guy, Mikhail Mikalski, beat him a few years later, or a year later. That was a 3-round decision. And I've seen half the fight, let's say, and it looks like grappling was the difference. He lost to Phil Hawes by majority decision. I mean, whatever. That was Phil Hawes at the peak of his powers, which if that guy didn't have a bad chin, who knows what he could have done. He could have been the world champion. But he was using his wrestling, and he did control and neutralize Imavov. But in the end, Imavov came alive and somehow secured half a 10-8 round on Phil Hawes on the feet without knocking him out. But either way, he didn't win the decision. He only got one 10-8 round. And of course, against Sean Strickland, he lost a decision. I thought that was a really good look, though, especially after Strickland won the title a few months later or whatever. And that was a good performance where Imavov actually won round 5, which is a very impressive feat against Sean Strickland. And round 2 as well, I believe. But here, I think he's going to be fighting a different physical force than Brendan Allen. And if he's coming in as Brendan Allen, the grappler, I think Imavov will shuck off some takedowns early, but I envision Allen getting them to the ground. And when I have to mention his losses, he has been knocked out twice by the aforementioned Sean Strickland and Chris Curtis. Best friends or former best friends. Either way. That's one where you can never use forever in the best friends title. But they both knocked out Brendan Allen in round 2 4 years ago or thereabout or whatever, 3 years ago. They were pretty close together, and they're very similar types of fights. He was slowed down, Strickland working his jab, Curtis hitting some nice body shots, and it wasn't just like he got overwhelmed. He got clipped. It was half a strike against his chin. He didn't go unconscious or anywhere close with the opening shot anyway, but he was wobbly and then finished off. So there's that, and those are his 2 most recent losses, unless you count the Malkoun fight. And even before that, he's only got 3 other losses. One was a submission 9 years ago or so to Trevin Giles, and the other 2 were 5-round decisions to Eric Anders and Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. So only UFC guys have ever beaten him, even at the regional level, the LFA level. Of course, I should mention that Imavov is at the UFC level, and I'm fucking stupid. Now, look, if you've got Imavov winning, I totally see what you see. It makes a lot of sense. On paper, he should be able to win the wrestling battle with his defense winning out and keep this fight standing. But I think Brendan Allen is going to be able to make this his fight. I think on the outside, small disadvantage, but on in tight, bigger advantage. And I've got him winning with grappling or just pure physical fucking strength. So I'm going Brendan Allen, and I've got him winning by round 3 submission. I bet on Brendan Allen, and I'll bet on round 3 submission as well as fucking everything else. And in the main event of the evening, we had Benoit Saint-Denis versus Renato Money Moicano. My prediction for this fight is Moicano wins. And I'll go with him getting some sort of stoppage. I mean, I guess if I say that, I gotta say submission. But he did get his first TKO in his last fight. But I'll go with him getting a finish of some sort in round 3, let's say. And it's not like he's the most reliable late finisher, Renato Moicano. Typically, he gets his finishes. They're rear naked chokes, and most of them are in round 1. A few trickle into round 2, but that's it. Well, he's got one over a decent fighter in round 3, but that was 14 years ago, almost 15 years ago. So there's that. But I do think here he would have to outlast and tame Benoit Saint-Denis. And by the way, that's not my read on the Dustin Poirier fight, which I picked Benoit Saint-Denis to win, by the way. But Saint-Denis did get tired and whatever, I'm sure, but he got clipped. Power is what made the difference there. Poirier hit him with a few good shots, an uppercut a minute before the finish or whatever, and he had taken some of the life out of him before putting the final nail in the coffin with that right hook or whatever it was. But it was a power shot. Renato Moicano doesn't have that power. I've been through this before. He's got knockdown power. Go ask Cub Swanson. I believe that was a jab. But no, Renato Moicano is a much better striker than he'll ever be given credit for. If you don't believe me, go watch his fight with Calvin Kattar. He's an excellent fighter on the feet. But here, he doesn't have the power to stop Saint-Denis, and he can't get in tight where Saint-Denis can stop him. I think Saint-Denis got excellent power. I think it's not even like, pure fluid power striking. It's just like physical force. And a lot of it is just getting in tight and slamming fists and knees into your face, like he did with Poirier. He put him in the clinch for a minute and just tried to knee his face. And Saint-Denis is stronger in tight than Moicano. He's probably more powerful, and overall, in the first round especially, he's more dangerous. But Renato Moicano, despite having been knocked out a few times, he was knocked out by speed, really, not power. He was knocked out by faster, smaller, generally, strikers. Rafael Fiziev, okay. I mean, everybody's kind of smaller than Saint-Denis, to be honest. But Rafael Fiziev knocked him out, and he's the biggest guy to do it, and very fucking fast, obviously. But the other two were Jose Aldo and the Korean Zombie. And, of course, Jalen Turner came close. But for whatever he's lacking in speed, which he's very fast, he makes up for the rest of it, though, by being 7 feet tall. So there's that. But look, Renato Moicano, despite losing the speed, he's still the more vulnerable guy here. If you told me somebody was getting a knockout or a finish on the feet, I would pick Benoit Saint-Denis. I don't think Saint-Denis is nearly as sharp as the rest of those guys. But again, he makes up for it with brute force. And he's only got, 4 TKOs or whatever. But most of them take place on the feet. Not all of them. He put away Thiago Moises on the ground. But he's Benoit Saint-Denis. He's definitely a force on the feet just from his ferocity and power. But I think Moicano wins this fight by surviving against Saint-Denis and finding a way to tame him. Typically, that'd be by getting him to the ground. Moicano's really good there. But again, Moicano, I think, is the cleaner kickboxer. And that may not win him any kickboxing rounds early. But down the stretch, once all the power and ferocity and all the horseshit fades away, I think Moicano will be the better adjusted fighter on the feet and on the ground. Speaking of which, on the ground, it's very interesting. Saint-Denis is a fucking force. He's a monster on the ground. And, look, Moicano has been submitted. It happened with Brian Ortega. Although I don't know if you'd call that on the ground. But he got guillotined. And Benoit Saint-Denis, he may not have... I don't think he's going to submit Moicano with anything opportunistic like that. But there's a chance he bulldozes him, goes through him, and cranks his face early like he did the Bonfim, which, by the way, Moicano also did that to Bonfim fucking 20 years ago. But Benoit Saint Denis is the stronger guy. He's the more likely guy to end up on top first. I think that's going to be plan A for him, even in this matchup. I don't think it matters who it is. He wants to slam some kicks into your ribs, rip you to the mat, get on top of you, and beat you until you quit or choke you. And I think that's going to be plan A against Moicano, and I don't think he's going to have that success against Moicano. Maybe smashing him, I think his ground and pound will certainly be there for him, as well as his physical strength. But Moicano is a really tough guy to conquer jiu-jitsu-wise. Again, that submission loss was Brian Ortega's guillotine, the best weapon in the game. I say that about like everybody's guillotine. Jack Hermanson, whatever. But it was a very good guillotine deep into the fight, and that's the one way he got taken out with a submission. So, and with all the other losses being, or finish losses being knockouts on the feet to quicker and generally lighter fighters, faster fighters than Benoit Saint Denis, it stands to reason that Moicano, despite being 35 and 3 months or whatever, he can survive Benoit Saint Denis and take away all that danger and turn this into a different fight. That's not, again, what happened with Dustin Poirier. It's not like Poirier got out of round one and took over. Now, Benoit Saint Denis was back to taking over. But Poirier, who hits 3 times harder than Moicano, was able to make the most of his opportunities, and he shut the lights out. So I think there's a chance Saint Denis falls off. I can't say he's going to fall off a cliff for sure. I mean, look at his other loss. It's to Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos, where he took the fight on short notice, moved up in weight, and fought a guy in Zaleski who was on something or another that he tested positive for. And Zaleski kicked the shit out of him for 15 minutes. The fight could have been stopped, and it could have looked much different on his record. But the fact that it went to a decision does speak to his toughness and grit. That guy is a tough son of a bitch. But, I don't think Moicano has the danger or the power of Zaleski to really beat him up. But I think he's got the speed and the kickboxing to outpoint him in a kickboxing bout in the second half of this fight, should he get it there. And I also think Renato Moicano has the overall grappling where he might get Benoit Saint Denis down and take away all that round one danger. But I certainly think if he doesn't get finished, Moicano's grappling will be the dominant force left in that fight. And I envision him taking over at some point against Benoit Saint Denis. And I think if Moicano's taken over a fighter who's, scarred from his last loss, starting to fatigue and a little discouraged, I think Moicano can force a finish. Typically, that's by rear naked choke. That's all he ever won by, finished a fight with, up until his last fight against Jalen Turner, where he finally got his first TKO. It was on the ground, yes, and he was the guy who was actually knocked down a few minutes earlier, but he still got the finish on the ground after weathering the storm from Jalen Turner and letting his grappling take over the fight. He made his grappling take over the fight. So I'm going with Renato Moicano. As for the bet, I bet on Moicano. I'll bet on everything I speculated on with Moicano. I'll see what jumps out. But I will definitely hedge with Benoit Saint Denis getting a TKO in round 1 and in round 2. I think, again, when he's firing on all cylinders, he's a physical force. He's fucking deadly. And Moicano, despite losing to speed and whatever, he's the guy with the 3 knockout losses. So I will hedge with that. And plus, Moicano is 35, as opposed to 28-year-old Saint Denis. I think I just talked myself out of my pick. No, I am going with Renato Money Moicano, and I will hedge, like I said. But like, share, subscribe, all that horse shit, and check out my other videos.